limited Taapaitissuutse limited GGWG DJ tuane. Kaapasasti ton pegun kamasat 8 ton. Chiga ispatentagones pasaji tane to sestadan. Chinascomatin chin guy tenamin jiminatukushan. Astamuiji jijikas no mentoto kuen janatsko kasagan jiminatukushikewin. Tande kamat no matona minatukushun ano mashauke ano suchimran. Katabed min abopegosian nantam chutan dentit. Uitabmin abotakwak jaji shetchen. Jam tishwabaden je ish banyan anujish kasagat. Uitabmi katabenamin. Jinaskumatin jewin anujish kasagat. Espeshajidan jibajit namadan kasno jagwan jadodman anujish kasagat jimit. Amin.
Amin. Temiskimet Nastash. Respecting the Innu culture, the Innu language has been a large part of how we want to conduct this inquiry right from scratch. And we're so grateful to Nastash for being able to give our reflection today. Moving on now with welcome from Commissioner Devine.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to these formal hearings. These formal hearings will run for 3 days. The first 2 days will be almost entirely playing videos of expert witnesses presenting their reports. On Thursday, and that will be recorded, on Thursday, we will hear from those parties who have limited standing, as well as, but most importantly, I think, the 6 families whose child deaths we completed investigations on. The final submissions will be live on the screen on Thursday, and they will not be pre-recorded. Translation is not available this week, but we will have all of the week's proceedings translated later and available to people. And it will be posted on the website for people to look at their when they're available to watch it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Devine, and I'll hand it over now to Commissioner Kilby for her welcome to you all.
Thank you. Our witnesses this morning will be Mr. Kenn Richard and Miss Tara Petti, who are the lead investigators and co-investigators for the 6 death investigations of the commissioners ordered. They will present their final report, whose focus is on systemic issues identified over the course of the 6 investigations. We expect their testimony to take most, but not all, of the day. Late this afternoon, we will begin the testimony of Judge Bill English, who will present his work on legal representation and the court process. Judge English's testimony will continue into tomorrow, as we do not expect to have the time to conclude it before we wrap up today at about 5 p.m. We will finish Judge English's testimony tomorrow, and tomorrow we will also hear from the last of the expert witnesses, Doctors Barbara Fallon and Tara Black, who will present their findings on the quantitative analysis of child protection data.
Thank you very much. I'll now hand it over to Kelsey to continue with the session for today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kelsey Lockyer, and I am one of the counsel for the inquiry. Welcome this morning. As the commissioners have introduced, we will be listening to the pre-recorded testimony of Kenn Richard and Tara Petti this morning. The first portion of this is 1 hour and 20 minutes long, after which we will take a 10-minute break. We'll be camera off during this, as we expect and hope that everybody's attention would be towards the video. But just a note, we will have a 10-minute break after this first video, which again is an hour and 20 minutes. Thank you. You're not able to hear us on can you not hear the video there? Was anybody able to hear the recording there that time?
Everyone's on mute. Oh.
Okay. So they're all reporting that they never saw it or heard it.
They hear us? Did they hear us? I don't know.
Did they hear it? I think it's the recording.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're fine.
They can hear us, they just can't hear the video being.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Audio sharing is checked off there, right? Share sound, there we go. Just restart.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. This session, this we don't actually all have to rise considering we're online, but this commission of inquiry is now open, and it is now in session. This afternoon, we will be hearing from the investigators for the inquiry, Tara Petti and Kenn Richard. They were independent investigators for the inquiry, and we are having them declared as experts in the area of Indigenous child welfare. They will be providing their evidence on the overall report and their investigation process. Following their direct evidence, which I'll be leading, the parties with full standing may ask questions not already discussed within their scope, and in limited standings, parties may ask questions which have not already been discussed. If counsel for any of the parties have any questions that they're not able to get to today, we do have some overflow time at the 20th to the 24th of April. There's some proceedings scheduled. I'm not exactly sure of the time yet, but hopefully we won't need it. But just in case it is needed, we do have that time. Some questions will be directed specifically towards an investigator. Other will be open-ended. Where a question is open to either, both investigators do not have to respond if they feel the other has sufficiently answered the question. In the initial bit, I'll be first directing some questions towards Mr. Richard and then towards Ms. Petti. That'll just be the qualifications. So as I said previously, we are having Mr. Richard and Ms. Petti declared as experts in Indigenous child welfare. At the initiation of their testimony, they'll go through the qualifications, and then if counsel have any questions at that time regarding qualifications, they may ask. We'll then proceed with their direct evidence proper, and then, as I said, go through the cross. Okay, so unless there's anything arising first, I'll get the investigators sworn in. I would also note, this is specifically towards the family lawyers. Up to this point, I've been given permission by all of the family lawyers to say the names of the children and the families who have been involved. I've received that confirmation via email from each of the family councils. So unless there has been a change to that, we will be allowing the investigators to use the names of the children and the families involved within the death investigations. But if there is any objection to that, could family council please let me know now? Seeing no hands or any objections, I will continue on. Okay. So Mr. Richard, we will get you, would you rather swear or affirm? You got the Bible? Okay. Please take the Bible in your right hand. Do you swear that the evidence you shall give to this inquiry shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do so swear.
Okay. Please state your name for the record.
Is Kenneth Denis Richard. Kenneth D. Richard.
Thank you very much. And Tara, would you like to be sworn or affirmed?
Affirmed.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence that you shall give to this inquiry shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name for the record. Okay, so we'll begin first with Mr. Richard. Mr. Richard, can you please describe your educational background for us?
I have a master's degree in social work from the University of Manitoba in 1978. I have a bachelor's degree in social work as well. Yeah.
And please describe any relevant work experience that contributed to your role as an investigator.
I've had a pretty long career, so I'll just I'm glancing at my own resume here to remind myself of what I've done. I'll focus on child welfare related because I've done other things in my life. I was the founder and executive director of Native Child and Family Services of Toronto for over, I dare say, 40 years. I in that role, did all things related to child welfare, child protection. I was the only staff person and built the organization as a fully authorized child protection service, coming from a holistic and indigenous cultural base. It was the first one in any urban center. It exists today, large, holistic, multi-service agency, and I would say that I'm the founder. Well, I am the founder and long-term executive director. I have also been active federally. I am the vice president of the First Nations Caring Society, which you'll know by our executive director, Cindy Blackstock. So I've been at the activist role, national issues. I have participated in multiple inquiries in the past, including inquests associated with the deaths of children and child protection under my authority when I was a child welfare authority in Toronto. I have written, I have taught social work for. I'm a long-serving sessional instructor at the University of Toronto School of Social Work. That is supposedly one of the top 10 social work schools in the world. Not to brag, the old Toronto brag. But I've been fortunate to be at the center of so many significant events in child welfare. I've also participated my own little company, boutique consulting company, since I retired at Native Child in significant child welfare related projects. I assisted the 60 Scoop Healing Foundation in their national engagement process and in their final report that established their service model. In that process, I interviewed across Canada victims, we'll say, some survivors of the child welfare system. I have been expert witness in class actions. I was part of the presentations to the Human Rights Tribunal. I can go on a little bit more, but I also did frontline protection on a motorcycle in downtown Winnipeg back in the 70s. So I started right on that front line and worked my way into the world that I have inhabited. And my final qualification, I suppose, relates to the work that I've been doing with the inquest itself, with the inquiry itself as an investigator, and how fulfilling that project has been, and all the skills and knowledge that I have brought to it hopefully has, well, we'll find out how its impact. But so thank you. I appreciate being here. And I think that's all I should say about that.
Yeah.
I think I just want to say I've won a few awards and I rarely talk about them, but they certainly related to some of this work. I have a Meritorious Service Cross. So people, when they see that MSc, they think it's Masters of Science. That would be furthest from my reality. But I have a medal, quite a chunky one, related to my volunteer work as an activist at the national level. So there's some pride there, and I won a few other awards as well. So not to blow my own horn too much, but thanks again.
Thank you. You mentioned that you'd been qualified as an expert in court before. What have you been qualified as?
As a child welfare expert. And these are mostly in contests at the case level with regard to identity of Indigenous children, the best approaches, best practices from the front line, based on my experience both as a frontline worker and as the developer of so many other child protection initiatives.
Excellent. Thank you. Throughout your work, was there anything that limited your understanding within the area that you're being qualified as an expert as? And if so, how did you work around that?
I've never been asked that. I think I got as fulsome as one can get. I don't think there's much has been limiting me at this point. Thankfully, I'm at an age and stage where that's all jettisoned. I'm free to speak my mind.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. And how and when did you become engaged with the inquiry?
Yeah, I was involved in almost 3 years ago. Initially in the development of the role, for example, in terms of the inquiry's development of its circle process, the 4 stages. I was instrumental in that, acting as a general advisor in terms of the process in the investigation themselves. I forget when my first investigation was, and that would be with Tara. That's 18 months ago, probably like that. So it's been 3 years, year and a half or so of development, kind of engagement, and then the final being the investigation process and the reporting and where we are today.
Thank you. And what was your role within the inquiry?
Well, the investigator role was an agreed on role. And it's, am I allowed to refer to notes, or I can wing it too, but it's better.
Yes, I just asked if you're referring to any notes that you identify that you're referring to them, and
I was just,
we'd have to
yeah,
provide anything.
yeah, I'm just, what I wrote actually is the notes that I'm looking at in my preliminary to almost every investigation report. So, I just I'm looking at it. Yeah, continue to be independent consultants. We report to the commission directly. We certainly day to day work with the lawyers and anybody else that is, any other stakeholders, but we have that kind of direct independent relationship. Our job is to receive orders from the commission with respect to areas of inquiry that have been agreed on between the stakeholders through their consultations. And in those orders to engage with the record on each and every file, and to speak with the family particularly, but also to all others who had carriage of the file from CSSD, for example. And in those engagements, attend to the orders and craft a report summarizing the systemic issues that were evident in each individual report. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay. So you kind of discussed it there briefly, but were there any specific tasks, direction, or instructions given to you as an investigator?
Yeah, each case got a specific a set of orders, basically questions that were really negotiated through the parties. And they were what I would call marching orders that told us what to do, but it also told us what not to do. And we found that, in these complex, difficult files, the structure that assisted us in actually getting the job done.
Thank you. And was there anything that limited your work in this role?
The weather was big in terms of family engagement. The weight of the work, what I mean by that, we're not talking about, anything lightly. This is as heavy as it gets. So we had to be mindful to take our time and give good thoughts and keeping the client, if you will, the families and their good and welfare, because they were fragile. They all were in their own way. So, these weren't limiting so much as strong considerations that we had to attend to. But the big limitations were the weather, and these things always take a lot longer than people anticipated, and we were dragged into that as well. I'm not sure our role in that, but yeah, but nothing truly nothing. I could I stand up and say this was a huge compromise. The only other thing would be that some witnesses were not enthusiastic about the engagement. I think they had their own lawyers, as you know, they did. And so it became a little more difficult to have the kind of conversations we wanted to have because we weren't looking to blame and shame. We were looking to identify the bigger issues. But that's the nature of this work, and we worked around it, and they didn't turn out to be huge limitations, but everything takes time.
Thank you very much. To the other council on the call, if anybody has any questions for Mr. Richard regarding his qualifications and experience in the role as an expert in Indigenous child welfare, I'll invite you to bring forth your questions now before we move on to Ms. Petti. Seeing nobody raising hands or speaking up, I will move on now to Ms. Petti and her experiences and qualification. Okay, Ms. Petti, could you please describe your educational background?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Winnipeg from 1997. I have a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Manitoba. I obtained that in 2007. I have a Master's of Social Work from the University of Calgary, and I got that in 2015. I'm currently a PhD student with the University of Manitoba in the Faculty of Health College of Community and Global Health Sciences.
Thank you. And can you describe any relevant work experience?
Sure. I've spent approximately 20 years working within the Manitoba child welfare system. I've worked for my First Nation, which is Peguis. I've also worked with another agency called Anishinaabe Child and Family Services. Both of those agencies served First Nations in the Interlake area of Manitoba. And then I went on to work in the Southern First Nations Network of Care, which is a child and family services authority that provided services to First Nation child and family services agencies in Southern Manitoba. In each of those agencies, I had exposure and work experience working in frontline work, as well as licensing foster homes, working with agency legal counsel, and then in the Southern First Nations Network of Care, I worked with development of what was called the Vision Keepers, which is the quality assurance portion. So developing measures of compliance with the First Nation agencies to ensure that they're meeting the Manitoba Child Welfare Standards, communication with all levels of government, and education in the workforce, and hearing complaints. That work also included working alongside the Manitoba Child Advocate and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, looking at critical incidents, including child death.
Yeah.
I'll also add that in the last several years, I've worked as a consultant, and I have worked in areas that deal with First Nations child welfare agencies implementing case management systems. I've also worked with First Nations that are in different stages of implementing their own nation-based child welfare law. And I've worked also as an expert witness on a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal case that looked at, that was brought forward by First Nations in Manitoba, looking at the Manitoba and Canadian governments to look at the end to unnecessary out-of-home placements of First Nations children.
Thank you very much. Do you have any publications, honors, awards, or anything that you haven't already discussed that you would like to know?
So I have been involved in some publications. So notably, I've been involved with the First Nations studies of incidents of child abuse and neglect. So there were two studies that I was involved in, which was in 2008 and then in 2019. Both of those have reports. Involved in some publications around the looking at like the information and developing an information sheet that describes the kind of the child welfare system in Manitoba, and later looking at essential services and risk and child protection during the COVID-19. So looking at how do we prioritize chronic needs. And then I've also been involved in some confidential reports, looking at the reports that were developed for the Human Rights Tribunal case where I was served as an expert witness. So in those cases, we created a report focusing on the out-of-home placement of First Nations children in Manitoba. And then we also produced a reply report with a similar name, which was in response to the government's review of that report. And I have done several presentations, academic presentations regarding the First Nations incident studies, looking at community wellness and engagement processes, and also looking at trajectories of First Nations, particularly the Northern Cree and the Blackfoot in Alberta, and how to support them. So yeah, and other ones related to the incident study.
Thank you very much. Throughout your work with the inquiry, was there anything that limited your understanding in this field? And if so, how did you work around that?
Not directly to the subject matter, like to the work, but any kind of questions that I had logistically were answered very, very sufficiently by the inquiry team.
Thank you very much. How and when did you become engaged with the inquiry?
I answered a call in response to information about the hiring of an investigator. So I sent my resume and was eventually contacted for an interview and hired in December of 2024.
Thank you. All right. And what was your role within the inquiry?
So I was hired as an independent investigator, working with the lead investigator, so my colleague Ken.
And what was your mandate as an investigator?
Well, to conduct investigations onto 6 applicants or families who each had experienced a loss of their child, and each of those children had experience in the child welfare system in Newfoundland. So to investigate circumstances as directed through specific orders of the family.
And following that work with the specific cases, was there anything further that you produced?
Well, we produced a report for each of the cases, and then we also created kind of a summary report and participated in the circle hearings.
Excellent. So were there any specific task, direction, or instruction given to you as investigators?
Well, they would have been the orders that then described what we were supposed to investigate, and then conducting our investigation according to kind of a methodology that was set prior to me joining the inquiry team, but was examined and followed to the best of our ability.
Great. I'll ask you some further questions about that methodology afterwards, but thank you very much. And was there anything that limited you in your work?
I would agree with Ken that oftentimes weather was a factor in travel. I was coming from, Manitoba, so there were a few times where plane delays and reschedules impacted my ability to be in the community, and where I had to participate in a couple of the hearings online.
Thank you very much. Now, turning to counsel on the call, unless anybody has any further questions for Ms. Petti regarding her qualifications and experience as an expert in Indigenous child welfare, we'll move on to their direct examination proper. Okay. Seeing no hands from anybody or any concerned faces, I'll move on now. So from this point on, unless specified, the questions will be directed towards both Mr. Richard and Ms. Petti, and they may choose to answer. They may both choose to answer, or if one of them wants to answer the question and the other one feels it's sufficient, they don't both need to answer all questions. So I'm going to begin first by bringing you to your overall report, and everybody, all parties on this call now should have been provided a copy of that report. Please let me know if you have not been, so we can have one sent to you as quickly as possible, as the investigators will be likely referring to it throughout their testimony. Okay. All right. So, what was the purpose of authoring a final or overall report?
The commission needed a synthesis of the 6 reports that really allowed us to make conclusive statements about systemic issues. The simplest way to look at this is to think about it as the common experience of the families. And there was a common experience, and anybody who's read the case files will see how redundant, and I say that in a very negative way, the information became. So that had to be rolled up and presented because that is the test of systemic. And so a document that would summarize clearly and concisely, a lot of work, over 1,000 pages of recording, many interviews with multiple people on very difficult subjects for them. You can imagine when you're talking about the death of a child or their family, how difficult those conversations can be. So there was a lot there. And what I would consider to be important is that it be processed in a way that it be useful to the commission's final report. So that's the fundamental purpose of that document. And it's one that can be released publicly because it's not non-identifying, yet doesn't take away from the client, the family's experience. So it would be a useful one for the families as well, that while they each had their individual reports, one that they could circulate without having to display all the issues the family went through to third parties, So we hoped it would be a document that had utility and legs, if you will, in multiple areas of consideration.
Thank you.
Tara might have her own views on this as well.
Tara, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
No, I believe Ken has covered that
Yeah.
sufficiently. Thank you.
I'm going to give Tara the next question.
What direction were you given in creating that final report? You had mentioned some nature and scope orders. Was there one provided for this?
No, not that I have seen, but there was understanding that we would pull together a report that, as Ken mentioned, didn't provide like that kind of de-identified all of the families, but provided an overall report about the common experience and the systemic issues that came up in each of the reports.
And what methodology, or sorry, Ken, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that if you have anything to add there.
No, and I know your next question, I kind of anticipate it. You can keep going with Tara.
Okay. What methodology did you use in drafting the report?
Well, we used the reports, the 6 reports that were written, and conducted kind of a more of a high level analysis of the 6 reports, looking at each of the systemic issues, and then, for lack of a better word, grouping them into more common systemic issues that we could then list. I believe there was a number of systemic issues, and I'm just looking at I believe 11 or 12 kind of broad systemic issues that captured, what we found in each of the reports.
Thank you. And I will, take you guys through each of those issues for discussion of those later on once we've gotten through how you've conducted this report. But thank you very, very much. So you mentioned that the reports were written with information from the death investigations. How was information compiled in each of those investigations?
So that's directed to me or to Ken?
No, you can take the methodology
Okay.
completely. Yeah.
For sure. Okay. So I just want to ensure that I understand the question correctly. So you're wanting to get an understanding of the methodology of each of the reports?
Yes, each of the individual reports that then led into the larger one.
Sure. Okay. So we did have a guide, somewhat of a guide, that was developed. The focus of the method of the process, of our investigation was really family first, so we wanted to hear from the families, their understanding of their orders, their experience, questions that they had that maybe gave more emphasis on particular order or a particular piece of the order. So we had the opportunity to review case or file information that was specific to the orders, that was vetted and prepared for us as investigators, and then draw from an extensive list of potential witnesses, which again, with our inquiry staff, set out to contact them, request interview time, schedule interviews. So that was more an administrative process to got to the point where we then were able to interview the witnesses, and we followed the nature and scope orders as a basis for our interviews and the kind of questions that we asked. The interviews were recorded and transcribed. And then so with the recordings, the transcriptions, and then the file information, that then gave us, the data, to then analyze and produce a report. And I'll hand it over to Ken if he has anything to add to that.
No, thank you for that, Tara.
Thank you. Were there any limitations in how you were able to gather that data and get that information while you did those investigations?
I'll comment a little bit about the witnesses. There were many witnesses identified. Not all of them were either in a position or in agreement to be interviewed. And I felt that, in some of those cases, there were some pretty key people that we missed.
How did you?
I'll just add to that. We were given a select set of documentation on each file, and it was only documents that all parties had agreed on. So a lot of significant documents would not have been forwarded to us. I don't know how big a limitation that would have been, because I don't know what was in those documents, but we know that, we didn't have a fulsome picture necessarily. And there was, some of them had so much redactions that, not much sense could be made of them. So that was just another one. But I quite agree with Tara. Significant witnesses just were not interviewed, and that's unfortunate.
And how did you address those limitations within the reports?
Well, we had to work around them. Simple as that. And without, we heard enough from other parties to have belief in what was told. So, I don't believe that the reports were compromised such that they lost their integrity. They were not. They were just not as good, I think, as they might have been.
Sarah, do you have anything to add there?
No, I believe that was, kind of the biggest limitation. Actually, I would like to add that we didn't always have. I also think we could have spent like more time, interviewing the families, but it was an effort, to get that time. And then we had to, work on, building a relationship, and, working along with the families. Sometimes there were language barriers, and like Ken said, we worked with what we had. We felt that we were able to get, a lot of good information and insight, develop relationships, trust, and communicate with the families in a good way.
Thank you. Is there any background information, context, or history that you think we should understand or discuss before delving into the content of your overall report?
Not for me.
No, I believe we discussed it extensively in our report.
Excellent.
The background. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to begin by taking you through your report. So your report discusses systemic issues. How was a systemic issue defined in your work?
A systemic issue is on the ground, it's often a common experience, but that common experience has certain elements. And that is that the structures that engage and the processes and the professionals and all the various components of a system act in a way that uh, that there's a risk of doing harm or harm has been actually done by the system itself. So that would be what we would call an issue. So an example of that would be that child welfare is predicated, is complaints driven and forensic, and that social work assessments are actually investigations. That in the case of service to Innu, was a failed approach with respect to social work. And that's documented in the experiences of the families themselves. So the forensic nature of social work was not adopted by the social workers. They didn't do anything wrong per se, but their approach to helping was not an approach that did anything. It did not help. Indeed, it can be well documented in the experience of the families that it actually did harm. So that's a systemic problem that the services provided in child protection, even the word child protection is a difficult word. These all work in tandem to create this harmful scenario by which these families experienced, and end result was the tragic deaths of their children. Do you want to add to that, Tara, in terms of systemic?
You have provided a good outline of that. Systemic issue is a problem that's embedded within, the larger structure, in the policies and the practices and even the culture of the system. In child welfare, particularly for First Nations children and their families, these issues manifest as they end up being, resulting in harmful or inequitable treatment, disproportionate outcomes, and overrepresentation.
Thank you very much. So you both identified, I believe it was 12 systemic issues in your report. Of those systemic issues identified, were each of those present in the individual death investigations?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll now take you through each issue. So we'll discuss what the issue is, what it means, the implications for Innu people and the system, and then examples of how it was presented in the cases we examined. And then if there's anything, once we get through all of that, if there's anything else from the overall report that you'd like to note, we can do that then. So I'll ask to begin with the first systemic issue that you identified, which was the colonial legacy of intergenerational trauma. So what is or what does this issue refer to?
Well, it refers to the experience of the Innu people themselves historically and how that reverberates within the communities today. And I don't think you want a Innu timeline from me, but we do know that the themes associated with the Innu relationship with the government at the provincial level, both levels, was one of displacement and one of neglect, and one of forced cultural assimilation through multiple ways in which that's undertaken, starting with faith-based ministries, but also in all things that define our everyday living. So the Innu come at this through a few generations now, 2 generations of trauma related to that displacement, the Davis Inlet experience. I hearken back because I was outside observer at that point to the suicides that were rampant in the 90s, the gasoline sniffing crisis that became a national scandal that went away very quickly, unfortunately for the Innu. But there's a number of markers that are well articulated by Innu people themselves that will demonstrate why the Innu struggle still with some of the problems that were the very stuff of this investigation. So and trauma is carried collectively and individually. And each family that we observed, although we were not party to their problems per se, because they've been well assessed, poorly assessed in most cases already, that wasn't the parameters of our investigation. But we know full well that they inherited all that collective trauma in their personal lives. And that was part of the reason why child welfare intervened, creating an even more difficult scenario and additional harm.
Thank you. Tara, do you have anything to add there?
No, I believe Ken has described it very well.
Okay, thank you.
So Tara can take the next one. That's how we'll work it, if that's okay. We're gonna go between us. Yeah.
Yeah. I will just ask, I know you said some throughout some of the implications for the Innu people and for the system, but do any examples of this issue being present in the cases examined, spring forth in your memory or anything stand out?
Definitely. Um, the impacts, the intergenerational impacts of the relocation of the Innu, their loss of their land-based ways of life, erosion of language and culture, and then just I think we describe it as an imposition, of the Western systems of governance, including and additionally education, out of home care, child protection. It's resulted in collective and intergenerational trauma that we have seen come out in the investigations and in discussion with the families and documents that we reviewed, with our, high rates of mental distress, substance use, family violence, child welfare involvement, incarceration, and untimely deaths. So that's all I would add.
Thank you. Ken, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
No, that's fine.
And while we recognize that, the commissioners will be the ones that make the final recommendations, your experience and your knowledge as experts in this field is assistive to them. So, in dealing with the colonial legacy of intergenerational trauma, how do you think we can better address this moving forward?
So this inquiry actually is a good thing. But it's about reconciling the events of the past, the reality of the past, establishing new kinds of relationships, and moving forward with the recognition that the Innu, with assistance, and I'm going to underline that, will be moving and should be moving to service sovereignty. And what I mean by that is control of their child and family service programs. We won't even call it protection anymore because that word never worked, that word. Yeah, so that's my response to that, Tara.
Yeah, I think that there are many things happening both federally and also within the jurisdiction of Newfoundland and Labrador that are kind of responding, to the impacts of colonialism and, the structural conditions, that have had a major impact on the well-being of the Innu people and their families and their children. And that the inquiry, as Ken mentioned, is something that is going to help with a whole body of information and analysis of their child welfare system and the treatment of Innu people, so that it will inform collectively, the Innu Nation and the governments that are supporting the transition through frameworks such as Bill C-92 and opportunities to develop more of a nation-based way of looking at family well-being.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to add also that the hearings that were conducted in a way that was done like in the fashion of the circle was also very an important step in recognizing and looking at sitting together and seeing what can we do to solve this problem by talking about it.
Thank you. Okay, so unless either of you have anything else you'd like to expand on with regard to that systemic issue, I'll move on to the next one. So the next issue you identified was disempowerment of Innu families and youth. So could you expand on what that issue is and what it's meant?
I don't mind, Tara, whatever you want.
I can, yeah. So the disempowerment of Innu families and youth is really the structural conditions of the child welfare system, led to Innu people not having a voice, not having opportunity to be involved in decisions in regarding their children, having and I know there's another a systemic issue that looks at communication, but just not having effective communication. The families felt that they were often excluded, from participation, and they were inadequately informed of their children's experiences, issues that their children may have had while they were in other placements, and even an understanding of what kind of treatment they were receiving in their out-of-home placements. And so those were some I guess factors that contributed to our understanding of the disempowerment.
What? I can weigh in a little bit too.
I was just going to add to just other youth
Okay,
that
go ahead.
to youth that were either siblings or were in placements with the children that we investigated. Also talked about not really having an understanding of what was happening, where they were going, and not I guess that was the biggest thing, not having a good understanding of what was happening, where they were going, why they were going, and the the whole, like, the institutions of child welfare, whether it's the case managers and supervisors or the service providers and placement resources, were often made decisions, and the children and their families were more treated as passive recipients, and not as active participants. And I'll hand it over to you, Ken.
Oh,
And
Ken, you're muted. Ken, you're still muted there.
Sorry, I've got a dog here. We often say in social work, that the client knows best. right? And it's easy to toss off these cliches. Innu parents did not feel like they were treated like they knew best, like they were experts in their own lives. Although that's the rhetoric, the reality was, as Tara pointed out, that they were marginalized. Although the people went through the motions of communicating, like they got consents for medications and they got, all that stuff. The communications themselves were faulty. Tara already spoke to that. We'll speak to that further. Even the question of informed consent is very much at play here. Yeah, it's talk about a common experience. Every family felt this at a very basic level, and probably was the biggest motivation, I believe, for them becoming applicants, because their fundamental rights, moral in their mind rights as parents, as loving parents, was to be active participants, and none of them really felt that they were. And that's disempowerment of, real time.
Thank you. Tara, do you have anything to add there from what Kenn has said?
No.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And again, recognizing that the commissioners will be making the final recommendations. Aside from the general transitioning of the authority with the child welfare system to the Innu people, how do you think we can address this issue moving forward?
I want to beg to differ from some of the rhetoric that's out there. The word devolution doesn't sit well with me, because when you think about devolution, it means going backwards. We are talking about restoration, however, and restoration of authorities to make decisions in the life of your children, and what services best serve you, and who controls those services, and what kind of data you capture. So, all that stuff is the solution to the problem. Uh, Not to say it's perfect, because you can miscommunicate to your own people as well as to those who aren't, but there's promise there to find new ways of relating, because so much of this comes down to relationship, quality of relationship, quality of trust, and clarity and understanding. That should be improved with service sovereignty, and conducting the world in the Innu language will go so far in terms of empowering people, because language differentials were throughout all the issues, was the communication side. So it's a very hopeful process going forward.
Thank you. Tara?
Yeah, Ken described a lot of very good kind of solutions, to issues that we observed and seen in files. But yeah, like better communication, inclusion, and kind of relationship management beyond crisis management. And we also heard, that some of this disempowerment could have been also caused by just the nature of the way services were delivered in the community. So you had like situations where social workers worked in like 2-week cycles, and there was also lots of turnover, and at times there wasn't enough resources in the community. There was also, breakdown in relationship, during crisis interventions and crisis decisions, that then didn't allow for any, reconciliation, while the child was in care. And I think those are efforts, that a system can look at and improve on. In my experience in Manitoba, we did do a lot of work on, not only what we would call like working, through difficult conversations, having an understanding of when, to have some type of a mediator, involved, or an interpreter. So things like that, I think, are, steps that the system, can take in providing some, stability and effective communication and relationship building in the community.
Is there anything else either one of you would like to add regarding this issue before we move to the next one?
They felt that the families seemed to feel quite traumatized by not being seen as parents any longer. That was a fundamental feeling that they had. And it was through this disempowerment process that created a lot of the conflict that you see in some of the files.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
So the third issue or systemic issue that you both identified was the persistence of gasoline sniffing. So could you expand on that for us, please?
Every case had that as a complication, and let me be heavier than that. It was when the gasoline sniffing became chronic, and for most of them it did, that their spiral downhill was almost sealed. And when you look back at the experience of the Innu, gasoline sniffing's into is it second generation, third generation? I don't know. I don't want to know, but I know that it is there and it needs to be attended to. And I also understand that it's part of a broader set of issues, for sure. But in the case of these kids, it was highly precipitous with respect to their downward slide and their eventual suicide. So one boy had the gas bag at the base of the tree. So you can't ignore that. So I strongly feel that the bell should ring loudly again on gasoline sniffing. It seems like, while not normative, as stated in one of the reports we read, is certainly persistent. And others have done some work on this. The Australian, the Koori people there, there's precedents elsewhere. So it's a job to do, that's for sure.
Thank you. Tara, do you have anything to add there?
I think just the solvent abuse or gas sniffing was a crisis that the families experienced, that would then elicit them to reach out for help. They need, it was a life and death situation. It's very scary. And and it's loaded with everything we talked about already, like system kind of intergenerational impacts, um, and uh, and then the response of the system starts in every case starts off as well, we will help through treatment. And so that then it seemed to break down after that. The treatment, the communication, the understanding of the family. So that that was and to me that is also just the extreme crisis, and also the lack of resources for treating that this type of an addiction that also has severe impacts to your physical and mental health that are long term. And then so when there is even a stop to the use of solvents, there are still potentially long-term impacts to the mental and physical health of the person.
Thank you. Is there anything either of you would like to add about this issue before we move on to the next?
I wanted to add that in speaking with some of our community advocates during interviews, that there was a description of, the issue in the community, kind of that, had an ebb and flow, sometimes it was high, sometimes it was low. And it was kind of, like, uh, the words escaping me, but just, a pattern that was, decreasing as time went on.
I'm not, let me just add to that a little bit. I'm not sure it's decreasing for this population of kids. It seems to be, I don't know, this is where research might come in. Is it particularly to kids who have a downward spiral going with respect to their mental health, and that gasoline sniffing is part of that spiral? Or does it precipitate that spiral? Or how extensive it is with the child? Because there is a child population in these communities that is healthy. I think, my frame of reference has been very narrow, but I think this is an area of inquiry.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Tara, did you have anything to add there?
No.
Thank you. So the fourth systemic issue that you guys identified was service gaps and crisis-driven interventions. So could you expand on what is meant by that, please?
It's service gaps does a disfavor to the reality. There were no services substantial of any substantive nature, and the expectations on services to any community is that there be some preventive services with respect to supports to families, daycares, nurseries, those sort of broader ones, summer camps, recreational programs, so these are all what we would call prevention. Also screening for hearing, screening for eyesight, screening for autism, FASD. That's also part of the picture with respect to preventive services. There's also, you would expect to have some kind of tertiary program, secondary prevention, they call it, where people are identified as having issues, but the intervention is early enough such that they get the help they need. So further services might not be required. It might be, for example, special assistance for an autistic child, even relief for parents who are overburdened by children with special needs, or counseling with respect to marital problems or addiction issues. These are all secondary prevention. It keeps the families together, and it's done selectively, but without judgment. What I mean by that, without investigations on child protection or any of that. And the final one is, of course, the interventions that were actually provided, and they were provided in a very minimal way, and that is basic child protection. The child protection in the community, Natwashish, was crisis driven. It was being provided by overburdened social workers who, according to one of the witnesses, didn't have a clue about what they were looking at. Well-intended, and we found no incidents where they did deliberately any harm, but they were, and they will be the first to admit it themselves, were overwhelmed by a very under-resourced system, and by being, and some of these folks, they seem to work 40 hours, 50 hours a week, because they'd be not only doing their requirements under their job, but at night they'd be chasing kids through the woods, trying to keep them from sniffing gasoline. So just imagine that life as these social workers. But that was the extent of the services, this crisis intervention, keeping kids safe, because safety was a huge issue with some of these kids. They were suicide ideation is just part of it. The reckless life that happens. One of the kids kept coming home like he'd been swimming in the ocean. And this is the middle of the night. So, this is the nature of social work there. So there were basically no services at the prevention at the secondary level, and the services provided at the prevention level were just too little, too late, done by exhausted social workers who I understood flew in and flew out. I get that, but that just added to the burden, because the continuity and the building off each other's work was highly compromised. So the whole thing was kind of a mess. And I'll just let Tara elaborate in her words.
I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. So how would you, once again, recognizing that the commissioners make the recommendations, how can we address this issue moving forward? And throughout your work, did you see any work being done within this area?
Tara?
So in in everything that that Ken described as far as like services available in the community. So the development of services that are Innu led, that come from the Innu Nation, and that are brought, to a reality. Is is something that will fill that. We call it prevention, we call it treatment, but what does that look like, and how is that um, how is that described and then created by the Innu themselves. um, and we also observed that during this time there were developments of different types of treatment programs, and uh, different things that the Innu were doing, that gave them a lot more, that empowered them to um, have more activity and gathering on the land, um, and opportunities for young youth to participate in walks with elders or with older people, and learning how to go to the land. In every um, interview we had with family members, that was where they saw solutions, that was where they saw healing, and that disruption of that has resulted in how they were living today. So moving back to that is that is supported, resourced, and structured in a way that uh, elicits participation from everybody, and knowledge and healing.
Yeah. Ken, is there anything else you'd like to add on this one?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. So the next systemic issue, the fifth one that you guys identified, was an over-reliance on out-of-province placements. Could you expand on what this issue referred to?
So Newfoundland, Labrador itself has limited relative to the more developed or affluent provinces resources in this regard. But you have stuff. You do have stuff. You have on the island, Janeway and Hope Valley, and there's a couple others. They were not really actively engaged in any way. And when questions were asked about that, generally, uh, typical response was, "Well, they didn't have programs that suited Innu kids." Okay, well, so that's fine. But I wouldn't ever leave it at that. I would say, well, wait a minute, aren't Innu kids part of Newfoundland Labrador? And they deserve to have some kind of, if they have divergent needs or different approaches required, shouldn't that be accommodated? It didn't seem like the question went there. Um, what people started doing, I think, and it became easier to do it over time, was to quickly go to out of province placements. And part of the motivation for that, I will say, is that the social workers really didn't get active in the file sometimes until all the issues were manifest. Kids sniffing, kids in danger. So there was an urgency to create safety. And I remember one of our witnesses saying, we sacrificed cultural safety, for actual safety of the child, because some of these kids were very close to self-harm or harming others. Yeah, there was, from we understand, also uh, kind of one relationship built on the next. So one of the out of province placements was Bart's. We asked Bart's, how come you got so many new kids? They said, well, we always had beds. You know, anybody who works in the Children's Mental Health Center work knows that beds, sometimes there's waiting lists that are months long. So if they didn't have a bed, they'd create one. And that's one of the problems. But they were responsive. And they often said, and this would be Quinty, this would be Bart's, this would be Ranch El Ro, is we can provide safety. Workers, overwhelmed workers went, okay, let's get that kid out of here, and let's get this kid far away, so that this kid could be made safe. And I can't criticize that as motivation, as the wrong motivation, absolutely. But it became a script, and there was no place where I could see that the Newfoundland Labrador itself was held to account by the INU or anybody else, by their own social workers. The folks from Labrador may be petitioning over to the island saying, wait a second, we got Innu kids, we got needs too. None of that seemed to be evident. And so, yeah, and it became a kind of a modus operandi that was undertaken without much critical commentary. That's impression as much as anything else. Tara, please weigh in.
Yeah, I, so I just would like to add and clarify that not all 6 cases had out of province placements that we understood. So there was one investigation that we did where the child was in a group home setting, but in Labrador. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I do, um, just kind of understanding, how the out of province placements were coordinated wasn't always clear and wasn't always consistent, in each of the cases. The case management, the communication, who was responsible for communication was you know was not consistent throughout. So in some cases there was like a third party kind of case manager that worked with the out of province placement and then communicated with um, the CSSD or the Newfoundland government agencies. And then in other cases, there may have been kind of an out what we're familiar with, which is kind of an out of province protocol or agreement, where there is some courtesy services delivered by the jurisdictional agency. So, but despite that, the placements themselves, although, offered, in some cases treatment, some sense of stability, what was missing was the Innu culture, the language, the connection with community. There was, lots of loneliness on the kids' side, and then on the family side, like not a clear understanding of what was happening with their children in these placements. So that often, just created, different issues, to mental health, having, behavior management, and that were really just kind of in response to the displacement of these youth.
Thank you. Okay. Do either of you have anything you'd like to add regarding this systemic issue?
Out of province placements have been the go-to response for high-risk kids like this in every province, everywhere. And the unfailing thing is that I've been watching it for 30 years. It rarely has worked well. And it's been hugely costly. The per diems on these are enormous, and they get inflated as with need. And I just imagine all those resources invested in that reinvested back in Labrador, and you could have use your imagination on that.
Tara, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Um, the only thing that I would wanted to add was like in my experience, like working in Manitoba, like out of province placements were very, very hard to achieve, so and in fact, like as working in in the kind of at the agency level, our understanding was they were not allowed. So so it had to be like very extreme to facilitate an out of province placement. And oftentimes out of province placements were because there was family members that lived out of province, not because we were sending a child to an institution outside of the province that we lived in. So that was, just really, I guess, surprising, for me to see that as a solution. However, when we looked into like as in the issues we talked about earlier about like services and resources and treatment plans options, those were also things that were uh, like I guess critically lacking in Newfoundland or in the province in the process of being developed. So that's that's all I would like to add.
Thank you very much. So we've been going for about an hour and a half now, so I'll just give us all a quick 5-minute break.
Good.
All right, everybody. So that concludes the first of the recordings. We'll take a 10-minute break now. So see everybody back here at 10:50 Newfoundland time or thereabouts. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We will now proceed with the second part of Ken Richard and Tara Petty's testimony. This next video is 55 minutes long, after which time we will determine whether or not we'll take our lunch break or just a short break and come back. So we will let you know, and please let us know if there's any difficulty hearing the video this time. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Curtis, so we can go back on the record now. Okay. So when we left off, we had just finished off with the fifth of the 12 systemic issues. So we'll now move to the sixth systemic issue, which was the lack of, the irrelevance to, and the inappropriateness of CSSD services to the needs of Innu families and children. So could you expand on what this was and why it was identified as a systemic issue?
You know, the primary service, if you look at it graphically, if you were to draw it out, would be child removal. So you tell me. I mean, I don't want to be glib here, but you know, child removal was not the service that was required to meet the need. The need was, in all these cases, established very early on with children with mental health issues, with special needs, and there was no services for that. What was provided was strictly related to safety and related to getting the kid as far away from their home community as possible. So I'll let Tara expand further on that, but that's kind of a graphic, you know, reality that was faced. And it's just to add to that, it's no wonder that the Innu have the feelings for social work that they have. You know, and here's where I ask people to subjectively and put themselves in the picture and think about their own childhoods, for example, because that is the greatest teaching that I can provide is that reflective moment. So, Tara.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to note that during the time frame that we were investigating, legislation in Newfoundland was quite narrowly focused. Like it wasn't. It did change in 2019.
Yeah.
So I just want to note that. And it really served more as a protection monitoring type of system where they only act when it's kind of a full-blown crisis. And so that's what we observed, in our investigations, and noting that there have been significant changes to the legislation in Newfoundland, and also with the addition of the federal legislation introduced around the same time. The the system didn't recognize Innu culture as a strength, and it was looked at as kind of a liability and a deficit, and it was not a helpful system, in that, from that lens, and the Innu also experienced, other types of separation, separation from their land to, into, a community with boundaries and houses. Also, the education, also meant evacuation, meant leaving the community, which is, similar to the treatment in Canada, like related to residential school, which is also separation, and just overall in Canada, there are, findings in relation to human rights complaints that, historically across Canada, child welfare has been openly discriminatory against Indigenous First Nation children in terms of the function of it and the funding.
Thank you very much. Is there anything either of you would like to add regarding this systemic issue?
Well, just what is appropriate? Well, community-based services that include not just cultural sensitivity, but cultural-based services, which would include on-the-land services, and however that's defined by each community is how it would go. But also the assistance of early intervention, assessments of these kids prior to, because there were most of them showing problems earlier in life. These are the kind of services that would have been helpful, and that harkens towards the future development of services that would be holistically based with prevention and early intervention being the core, as opposed to child removal, which was the norm.
Thank you. Okay. Tara, do you have anything further from what Ken has said?
No.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move now to the 7th issue that you guys identified, which was mental health and clinical care deficiencies. So what does this issue refer to, and how was it identified as a systemic issue?
Tara, you want to take the first?
Sure. Yeah, I got lost on whose turn it was, but thanks. So mental health and clinical care deficiencies was identified as kind of an overall systemic issue for all of the investigations that we did. But looking at things such as like the assessment of mental health, diagnosis and treatment, where a lot of that happened externally, like outside of the community. And then when there was a return to the community, there wasn't sufficient resources, to support, a clinical plan that would, that would ensure or help with stability and reintegration or back into the community. And when there was those kinds of plans in place, they were often made without the input of the family. So there was, the families were, receiving children back from, treatment, or what they thought was treatment, with a plan and sometimes medication, and that there was very limited capacity to follow and understanding and participation in the whole process. There is also like a huge language barrier. So even in assessments, that was, something that, you have a Western-based assessment and tools that are being administered to someone who is not supported with interpretation or even with other family members. For example, I have my own son has had a clinical mental health assessment, but it involved extensive involvement of our family and our experiences with him and with and what his day-to-day life looked like. So that a plan could be made around his mental health. So that that kind of participation of the family was not evident, and basically kids are being sent home with sometimes with some type of a plan or medication, as I mentioned, and not really any direction on how this is going to be supported. And that often led to a lack of support, and just kind of what recidivism, just back to the behaviors that were causing the issues for them to receive that types of treatment. And that treatment services, which were often resulted in some type of removal, were not addressed until it came to that. There's also the medication, the administration and prescribe of medication. There wasn't clear plan or even an understanding from the families why they were taking this medication. There was lots of barriers to the understanding and the impacts that were observed by the families that they felt were caused by their child taking medication. So there was a lot of education and understanding that needed to come to balance both with the the mental health clinical side, and then the family's understanding and input, into a treatment plan. And often, mental health services were not adequately resourced in the community, and it was often the RCMP, that were called to deal with the behaviors of children who were in extreme mental distress. And so what it led to was, criminalizing illness and criminalizing mental health instead of care. And then the transition, to the children leaving care or aging out or having their return to their families was not supported. And once they reached the age of 16, if there was not a voluntary file opened, there was no care or transitioning after they turned 16.
Thank you. Ken, do you have anything to add from what Tara
No,
said?
that was pretty thorough, but I will add that, the word treatment is never really well defined in most of the referrals, and what the actual programs provided were not really well defined either. BARTs, for example, aside from providing structure, uh, uh, they had no consulting psychiatrist. That they had. They did have a psychological assessment on one of the kids, but just the whole uh, illusion of treatment was really an illusion, particularly for Bart's, which was a major player. The ranch and Quinte Children's Home were also players in the out of province treatment, as was Hope Valley. Um, and a couple of what are indigenous specific short-term placements for a couple of kids. None of them had a treatment program that seemed to resonate with the kids, notwithstanding that they were there for treatment and that that treatment was being provided at very healthy per diem rates. It was mostly about control of behavior. And yeah, and just further to that, that failed when the kid got back home, and that's where the RCMP came in. So um, stir in other things that Tara referenced, and you don't really have a clinical program that is meeting any needs at all from our perspective. There were a couple of false starts, a couple of plans, but it was very primitive and mostly non-existent.
Thank you. Tara, is there anything that you'd like to add arising from what Ken has just said?
No.
Thank you. So we'll move now to the eighth issue that you both identified, which was governance, oversight, and accountability failures. So can you expand on that issue, please?
Well, this one, we look for when we're looking at, who's in charge. We look for a line that takes us from the child to somebody responsible, with a fairly clear path, and within that path, roles and responsibilities and accountabilities. You know, um, I'll just comment on one, and Terry, you can pick up on the others as you see them. But Tusker's case management was an odd uh, something I had not participated in or seen before, and that is a private consulting company being engaged by the province of Newfoundland to do the case management of their children in Ontario. Uh, Typically, that would not be what you do. What you do typically is you engage with a local children's aid society, because that's the model in Ontario, to provide a courtesy social worker. And that courtesy social worker would be bound by standards and underscored by legislation, bound by standards, with some kind of um, mechanism, a reporting mechanism. That kind of didn't happen. And I'm not suggesting that Tuskers didn't do a job, because in a lot of ways they'll say they did more than a courtesy social worker would, but they didn't have the same accountability to visit the child every 30 days, for example. That is in the case in Ontario. Because they were third party, they could establish the services any way they wanted. And I'm not suggesting that they didn't do a decent job, but they couldn't be held to account the same way as a publicly funded authority would have. And that can be alarming if she didn't do a good job, for example. So that was one that's just stuck out. Um, we also, and I'm going to let, yeah, Tara, you can speak of the Labrador Group Home or any of the others. But so that was something that was real. But just further to that, the whole oversight would, we don't want to repeat our data too much, but it was overwhelmed at the line level back in the community. And a lot of the communication, we weren't looking always at the specific reports, because we had the benefit of people who were doing that kind of work. But whenever I did look at specific reports, they were pretty superficial and checkbox. It was hard to really evaluate whether good work was done or not. Um, it was perfunctory, superficial. So just the quality of the reporting itself, and we can get into that as a communication breakdown as well. But there's those sort of observancies. But Tara, maybe you want to talk about Labrador Group Home or anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ken. As I mentioned, in one of the cases we looked at involved the placement in Labrador, and so what we found in that, that there was not effective oversight, of things such as clinical standards. So this was supposed to, to be a home with with children who couldn't be placed anywhere else. And their clinical oversight was for lack of a better word, lacking. There wasn't any consistency. There was an over reliance on who was making the decision. Was it CSSD? Was it the group home staff? And the group home itself was going through kind of a years long transition, from being monitored by the correction system to the child welfare system. The child welfare system did make attempts to demonstrate the deficiencies in the home, and there was active investigations in place when the incident happened in that home. And there was on the CSSD side, they had reports of non-compliance that didn't seem to go anywhere. And then on the group home side, it didn't really demonstrate how effective the oversight and decisions made outside of the executive director, so who reported to the board. So that to us was pretty an extreme example of the lack of oversight internally within the province of Newfoundland when it came to licensing and monitoring their own facilities. And that, you know, so we called that, you know, like it led to what we called a regulatory drift, you know, so there was an understanding that there was these regulations there was an understanding that, you know, they weren't being followed. And it just kind of stayed that way. And so that, you know, then, you know, it led to, you know, then these kinds of practices which were deficient and unsatisfactory to treat, you know, caring for Innu or Indigenous or any child in that home, that, you know, that it was normalized, you know, that was, and to us that was, you know, something difficult, you know, to navigate and to understand, you know. And as we mentioned earlier in the process, you know, a limitation to our investigation was, you know, the ability to speak to all the people we wanted to speak to in terms of witnesses. And in this case, you know, we didn't have an opportunity to speak to anyone higher than, you know, the CSSD kind of supervision level and the executive director of that group home. So we didn't have an understanding of, you know, how are decisions made at that higher governance level, around funding, around clinical oversight and licensing.
Thank you. Ken, do you have anything to add? Oh, you're muted there, Ken.
The Chihuahua again. Just yeah, that the communication between the players out of province were you know, often appropriate, but as I said, superficial, and then it got to the CSSD offices, and depending on the case and the nature of that relationship with the client would depend very much on how much that was actually conveyed. So oversight and accountability. One family feels very strongly that, you know, they were kept deliberately in the dark, and the accountability in this also includes accountability to the family. So we don't just apply what's in the law, but we apply what we would expect to be reasonable when somebody's caring for your child, is you get full disclosure. And that leads, I guess, into the communication breakdown question, where I know you're going to go, but I just wanted to kind of tie the two together there because they are part of the same breakdown.
Thank you very much. So that is actually an excellent lead-in. So now I'm going to ask you to expand on the communication breakdowns, which is the 9th issue that you guys identified.
Yeah. I'll just introduce, and I'll let Tara take this as well. You know, we see communication as not just exchanging information, but also in the context of fully understanding the communication, have a mutual agreement on what's communicated, and that people feel at the end of the day fully informed. That was not evident to a large extent in our conversations with the families. Some of them were very strong on, although they signed consents, although they had engagement, that they didn't fully understand. Some of this clearly would be language, but it's not just language, it's how the words are communicated, tone, you know, it's very much tied into the quality of the relationship. So if the relationship's already conflictual or difficult or whatever, which it was, because again, the weight of the file, the weight of the child and the child's distress, you know, it created certain anxieties that also acted as a negative filter, along with language barriers and just how you communicate cross culturally. I I I didn't comment now on the written record so much, but that's also part of communication, and that also lacked depth and breadth in terms of what was actually given to the families. And in some cases, the families became rightfully so angry because critical incidents, for example, one of the kids was running away, trying to run to Toronto, was running along the 401, for God's sake, you know, with the police sirens behind him and everything. Family didn't know about that. one boy in Saskatchewan. He spent 6 weeks AWOL. The family heard about it later. So it was just kind of I would say, sorry to use the N word here, and the N word here is negligence on the part of the workers to convey. But again, I'm sympathetic to the overwhelming nature of the role they had to perform back at the shop. So let's leave it at that. Tara.
Sure, thank you. So that, I touched on it before, kind of the communication failures, were very persistent, throughout and what we observed and what we heard, during our investigation and during our interviews. And those breakdowns led to, as Ken mentioned, a lot of distrust, anxiety, even avoidance. There was no trust, and there was, a fear of the families, that the more they said, the more that they lost. And so there was, and that could then have been interpreted by the system as, they are not communicating with us, or when they are communicating with us, it is hostile. It is, at times, we heard families describing, the police having to be involved whenever they met with CSSD. So that, was, a huge amount of tension and, erosion of any kind of relationship, that would lead to, working together, in the interests of returning children or healing or making decisions around the these children's lives. In some instances, there was even higher level like political involvement, and there wasn't really it didn't appear to be any kind of special measures taken to to work with and address the different dynamics when you have involvement with a family or a client who has a role or a different level, a role in the community that may require more confidentiality, or more just more support, in communicating and supporting a family. And yeah, and it was the communication that, it also led to, the disempowerment, and, families appearing, to kind of give up, or leaving the impression, that they're not engaged in their children while they're in care.
Thank you.
And I hope I'm making that clear, like in terms of, the communication was so, the failures, of communication were so damaging, that it led to no communication. and that, was, that created, environment of, of distrust, of division, and for families, like just a complete loss of what they didn't see their child again until in some cases until they came back and they were discharged from care, and there and so that is all related to the breakdowns in communication, and not to mention the language barrier, and the even the ability or the availability of community members to help the social workers with address the language barrier, or even potential placement opportunities in the community.
Thank you. Okay. Ken, do you have anything to add there? Nope.
No,
Thank you.
no.
Okay, so we'll move to the next issue, which is 10, reintegration, aging out, and excuse me, reintegration, aging out, and aftercare failures.
Joel, you know, I'm hang on. Tara, why don't you take this while I
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
kill the dog?
Okay, so we have touched on this in some of the other areas too in our response, but reintegration, aging out, and aftercare were also things that were, you know, consistently inadequate or non-existent. When transition plans were developed, as I mentioned before, they weren't, it was very difficult to follow up on them because of, you know, the availability of resources in the community, and then also the way in which, you know, the experience of being in care uh, differed. You know, some families did have an understanding of where their child was and what was happening. Maybe they visited them, but when they came home, you know, managing, you know, the reintegration and you know, the different dynamics, you know, that were introduced to the reintroduced to the family when a child was returned home that had been away for a long time, or been away for a time, and the expectation was that they would come home and be healed, you know, and they wouldn't participate in those behaviors that kind of led to the, you know, the crisis that led to their removal. And I'm just looking at my notes here. Sorry.
I can pick up then. So the you know, aging out is a very arbitrary thing. It's, yes, it's in the legislation, but it's based on an assumption that all kids in the system at 16 years of age are no longer children or no longer needing the support of those who are entrusted with their care. So this is, you know, the kind of a duty to care uh, principle, which we believe is compromised generally in child welfare when it comes down to aging out. Whoever heard of such a thing? When you're acting as a parent, your kids don't age out. They never cease actually to become children, to be children, and that the legislation has never really recognized that is a big failure. Plus, there was no services, and some of these kids that we looked at had really required, like one particularly would have required adult protection services, which weren't there, but they all continued to have extreme distress that was further exacerbated by all the issues related to coming home. Um, they didn't come home in a planful way. You would hope that there would be some kind of meeting between the stakeholders that are in the treatment center, for example, the family and CSSD online, or just bring them all together and say, this child is coming home. What are we going to do collectively to provide wraparound services so their reintegration is possible? This is dream stuff. None of this came to be. Most of the return homes are compromised, and they were already compromised going in, but further compromised by the child just wanted to get the hell out of the care scenario and didn't want any more social workers. And this was typical of all the kids. And there was nothing else for them. The community had not yet developed a sufficient clinical response at the healing center or anywhere else. So back to, I think, Tara's comments way back in this conversation, the RCMP ended up doing the case management. And that's too bad because this is the time when the tragedies unfolded primarily. So yeah. So aftercare failure writ large, I guess we'd say, with respect to that.
Thank you. Okay. Tara, do you have anything that you would like to add on that one?
No.
Thank you. So we'll move now to the 11th systemic issue, which you guys identified, which was cultural disconnection and the absence of land-based healing. So could you expand on what this issue refers to and how and why it was identified as a systemic issue?
Tara?
Sure, thank you. Well, the kind of the whole essence and being of the Innu culture is their relationship with the land, and with each other, and through their language. And when a child came into care and was subsequently removed from the community, all of that left. So there's little opportunity for them to be in their homelands, to experience different milestones and life stages with their family, and to speak their language and to experience the love and connection that was evident in these families, despite some of the hardships and problems that they faced in their lives. So it was, a huge systemic shortcoming to not be able to provide anything other than, maybe a visit, or a visit with the family, or the ability to go home for a gathering, and even to speak their language. We heard stories of, children phoning their families and not being able to speak Innu because the caregivers couldn't understand them and they wanted to hear what they were saying. And we know now, we know so much, and there's so much evidence, that, there's a huge therapeutic value. It's an identity shaper. When you are exposed to your culture, have a relationship with the land and language, being involved with, elders and extended family in your community. And, that wasn't, it was almost impossible to facilitate when, for example, a child was placed out of their community or out of the province. So it again, that was something that was changing. In one of the later files, there was an acknowledgement of development of a cultural connection plan. But acknowledgement, development, we didn't see that in practice. Not to say that it's not in practice now. And there were limited opportunities for and not consistent for the children who were out of province or out of community, the ability for them to return home for gatherings. There are very specific times of the year where the Innu will gather, where they'll go hunting, where they'll go on the land, and that was absent. And it really played a critical role in the lack of developing a stable identity, a sense of belonging. We heard from families that when their children came back from being out of province or being in treatment, there was often a loss of belonging, and they didn't feel accepted or that they fit in with the community anymore. So that that was all very detrimental and related to the disconnection of culture and land-based living.
Thank you. Kenn, do you have anything to add there? Oh, you're muted. The dog again.
I can't get rid of it. I've now lost my train of thought looking at this dog. No, just the there's a profound ness to this. The identity of at the age and stage these kids were at, identity was critical. Self-worth, self-esteem was all inextricably tied to feeling affirmed as a cultural being, and so it wasn't just a casual thing. This cultural disconnection, it was a kind of a trauma as well.
Thank you. And so, once again, recognizing that the commissioners will make the final recommendations, how do you think that this could be addressed or moving forward?
Well, this is where the INU will excel. On culture-based services. They are the owners of of that culture and will be able to, I think, with help, because again, I believe that people just can't exit the room. But I hope to see land-based programs. We were visiting Davis Inlet as part of our own orientation to this, and there was a group of kids, Innu kids, that arrived on a boat, and I forget what it was. It was an expedition. It's a program called the Expedition Program, I think. And these kids were just reveling in their cultural selves, and I could see the therapeutic value right off. Had a chat with my bear guard as we walked around a bit, and he was very clear on who he was and what his job was, his purpose was. So different from the experience of engaging those who had been engaged in child welfare. Um, uh, so that's all I wanted to add on that, and I'll take the next question as well.
Thank you. Tara, do you have anything else you'd like to add there?
Well, yeah, but just to add on to what Ken said, the opportunities to maintain, revive, the connection to the land as a method of healing and community development and family preservation are definitely, things that need to be given priority. Um, and there are, we met, and as Ken shared, there are the development of programs, the expedition that where we interacted with the children, the youth involved in it was, from, kind of like a more of a science-based, like a marine exploration, of the land. And, so the kids were, not only just experiencing living on the land, but they were learning about, how to, become, to protect the environment and, to look at environmental changes in the community themselves. There are very specific land-based gatherings that they adhere to, so having the opportunity for everyone to be involved in those things. And then we spoke with women in the community that would take the youth on walks, and by walks I mean like these would be for days, and even hearing from one of the grandmothers, saying, I didn't have a chance to teach my granddaughter or grandchild, these things because they were gone from the community. Those are so important, that really resonated with me because in my own life, in my own generations, that was something that my great grandmother said about my mother, who went to residential school. I didn't, my mother and her cousins and siblings said they let their grandmother down because they were taken away. So I heard that, when I heard the grandmother say, I didn't have the chance to take my grandchildren, to the land to teach them the things they need to know. And so that, is what, going back, to that and having opportunities for the community to develop those ways and those practices and to strengthen them is what I would recommend.
Thank you very much. So we'll move now to the final systemic issue that you both identified, the 12th one, which was fiscal and ethical issues related to for-profit out-of-province placements for Innu youth. So could you expand on what this issue refers to and how and why it was identified as a systemic issue? Oh, Ken, you're muted again.
Yeah, he's sleeping now, thankfully. Chihuahuas. This one, I couldn't help it. I had to put this in because when you look at the degree to which taxpayers' dollars are going into failed programs, you got to ring the bell. Somebody should, because I'm not talking so much about taxpayers' dollars, but just where could this have been better invested? We have done studies in Ontario on the for-profit system, um, and that it is a system that's in perpetual motion. It's motivated primarily by profit. I think the report really talks about the limitations to the profit incentive in the caring of children. How profit sometimes would compromise care, and that's been documented. So it's not just an opinion. There are reports in Ontario. We had Mark Cartouche as one of the witnesses, who is one of the principal authors of them. So you see these, and this is near where I live, so I'm well aware of these resources. Um, the per diems are inflated, and they get more expenses over time. Has been um, the general experience. Uh, that at one point, and I would not begin to cost the Quincy services, but if you look at how many people were on the payroll here with respect to serving one child, and think about that as a base budget for a community-based service, you've got a good agency, a healthy agency. And it's well documented that in child welfare, over 50% of costs associated with child welfare, typically over 50% goes into residential care services. And 10% of that population absorb most of that money. So it's time to rethink the fiscal side of things and see where investments are most appropriate. And that was outside of our scope, so we almost snuck that in. But we also snuck something in, and that is um, we have particular issue with the ethics of marketing children, the commodification of children. Um, the BARTS is particularly difficult. Broken Arrow Residential Treatment Services. When you think about that program, uh, the Broken Arrow is a metaphor that would be easily understood by Indigenous people as representing a place that will help you. Um, uh, Broken Arrow treatment, and the premise associated with that language is that there might be some cultural components to the program. None of this was the case. It was marketing, and we know that that particular organization was heavily into marketing to the north and to the east, and that Newfoundland Labrador enriched their coffers tremendously. And at the end of the day, while the question is whether they were helpful or harmful, it does almost matter. They suck so much money and created very little worth for that money that it has to be acknowledged, but also the ethical side of marketing, based on a false premise of having some kind of cultural connection, really irked us, frankly. So it had to get in there, notwithstanding it kind of is kind of in the fuzzy area whether it was actually within the orders, but I'm glad to see it there. Tara, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. And that was there was a lot of things that we felt we could have added as systemic issues, but they did fall outside the scope. This one kind of touched all of these, and kind of the biggest message that I got from this was, similar to, my own practice and my own experience in child welfare, where the message was, if we're spending all this money, uh, if the money flow to help this child only happens when we remove, then that is an issue. If we're spending, millions and thousands of dollars, um, how can we reinvest that in the community? And as as Ken mentioned, that would, if we were to look at the cost of having these children in care and then the outcomes that they experienced, what would it be to flip that and say, well, this was the funding and the expertise that the community had access to develop the resources in the community to either preserve families, or to treat families or individuals. So I know that, again, that, those things are changing as we speak. But, that we also, pay attention to, not repeating the same system, that we're trying to transform.
Thank you very much. So would either of you like to add anything to any of the systemic issues that you guys have discussed thus far?
Kenn?
Just a concluding statement, what we saw was what has happened in other jurisdictions. So Newfoundland Labrador is probably no better, no worse in its path, on its journey to getting at the right solutions to child and family well-being. But it did remind me of some time ago. And maybe this has to do with coming into Confederation later in the day, or whatever. I don't pretend to know, but it felt like I was going back in time a little bit. But so that is not a put down so much as saying, well, you have an opportunity to actually learn from others who have made, and I'm part of the world of making lots of mistakes. We've done some work, Tara and I, out west, that might not have the results that we'd anticipated. So there's been a lot of action. So I hope that the inquiry at the end of the day will look at what's been happening out there and accelerate its own process, and reference in its documents what is already been learned, not just from this investigation, but by others in a final report, because I know they have other witnesses that are going to be speaking to this stuff. So here's a chance to do an accelerated catch up. And I only wish I could be part of it. Anyway, so that's a concluding comment that I would have on the report.
Tara, would you like to offer any concluding thoughts on the report?
Yeah, I want to emphasize, that there, the what we are, delivering, in terms of our report, is systemic. It's not, there were harms, experienced by Innu people and their children, and it wasn't the result of, an isolated decision in each case. These were, or an error, or some individual, purposely conducting something that was not, that would harm this child. It was, decisions, it was decision paths, it was options, that were already entrenched and not serving Innu people. And they were rooted, in, the legacy and the history, of the Innu people and the development of the province of Newfoundland. So it was, prevention is, the term, that is going, and transformation or, sovereignty through nation-based legislation under federal policy, is, the movement, in that direction now. And like, as Kenn mentioned, we worked in systems, that have gone through different kinds of, phases and attempts, to either dismantle, to devolve, or to, provide more culturally appropriate, which is another term, services. And so, looking at, what we believe, that this requires, a lot of structural reform, with intervention grounded, in, the way of life of the Innu people that they know, and that they can easily. And as Kenn mentioned, the Confederation of Newfoundland, is a lot more recent, than and the Innu people are still very connected, to their language, their culture, and their land, and it's just moving back to, reclaiming, revitalizing those practices and those way of life that's supported, by all of these systems, and so that these systems can also learn from that and respect, the way of life that will preserve, this nation and their survival in a way that they see fit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move now from your overall general report to the death investigations. So I won't have as many specific questions regarding the death investigations as we have. We've have your reports, and then we benefited from your participations in the individual hearings. So the commissioners have heard from you regarding that so far. So I only have a couple of questions, and then of course family council who are on the call also have the opportunity afterwards to ask any further questions that they might wish.
You speak now.
All right, hello again, everybody. So that'll conclude the second portion of the videos. If you've noticed that we cut it off there before the end, that's just because it goes into some back and forth between council on scheduling that was not relevant for the record. So at this time now, it is 10 to 12 Newfoundland time. We will break until 1 p.m. Newfoundland time. So this will be our lunch break. When we resume at 1 p.m., we will go back to the recordings of Kenn Richard and Sarah Petti before moving on to the recording of former Judge Bill English. So just to conclude, we'll be back at 1 p.m. Thank you all for your attention this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.